well, that process is underway. Some groups are now talking again openly of some kind of independent homeland for Afrikaans people. Already, as you know, there's the enclave of Oranje. It's privately owned land in the Northern Cape where only white people live. The Freedom Front Plus has said it will support the ANC in the Northern Cape legislature for so long as Oranje is not interfered with by national government. Mondli Makhanya is the editor-in-chief of City Press. He joins me now to talk more about this. Mondli, good morning. I remember all of the talk about an Afrikaner homeland in the 1990s. Why do you think this is all suddenly coming back so strongly now?
Well, you know, as you say, this thing was properly canvassed and litigated in the run-up to the 1994 elections, and at some point, one of the means of getting the Freedom Front into the election process was that a full start council would be set up to investigate the feasibility of an Afrikaner homeland. And when it presented its report, it was the most unworkable thing. It was a patchwork of territories all over the country. So it was never anything that was going to work. And also there was no unanimity among Afrikaners about the need for such a Volksstaat homeland. And I think why it's happening now is because I think the core of people who wanted it have now coalesced around AfriForum and Solidarity. And I think, in those organizations, one can state quite frankly, they're not just conservative, they're actually openly racist, and they want an enclave that only belongs to Afrikaners. And they've become extremely powerful. AfriForum is very, very powerful. They do a lot of quality work in terms of doing charity in the Afrikaans community mainly. They help. They do lobbying on behalf of the language, and they defend people in court, etc., etc. So they've developed a lot of legitimacy in the Afrikaans community, and now they have used that legitimacy and power to put this issue of the Volksstaat on the table. And in doing so, basically creating the narrative that the Afrikaner person is not welcome in a unitary democratic South Africa, that the Afrikaner community should not be subject to a cultural or demographic majority. So basically, just to put it crudely, we do not want to live with blacks or other races, and we do not want to be run by people who look differently from us. And it's essentially a very crudely racist thing to say we do not want to coexist with fellow South Africans.
Is there something else here as well? Is it because, as I see our politics, it's sort of fracturing? You see the rise of a large number of political parties that are really about identity. Think of the Patriotic Alliance, sort of, the IFP, sort of, MK, sort of. And because the ANC is so weak, the one party that really did try and campaign in every community, and you can say what you like about the ANC, that historical fact is still true and important. But because the ANC is so weak, does that give more space for groups like AfriForum?
It definitely does. And I think the weakness of the ANC is not just politically weak. ANC it used to be the center of society. It used to pride itself on, in its own words, the leader of society. It has given that away. And so it's become politically weak. And then what the ANC has also done is given up on the notion of itself as a non-racial party. If you look at the National Executive Committee of the ANC today compared to the National Executive Committee of the ANC, let's say 15, 20 years ago, when it was very much a mirror of South Africa, the ANC itself has basically become an African majority party. And I think that's given a lot of space to the mushrooming of, as you say, kind of like colored nationalism on the one hand, and also you actually have kind of like quite a significant religious party in Al Jamaa. So you are having that kind of fracturing in the society without the party of non-racialism, the party that actually stood and and centered society being there and actually offering that leadership. It doesn't need to be a big majority party that it used to be, but the ANC, at least it represented the core aspects of what of the constitution and what the values of the pre-1994 struggle was about. So South Africa has lost it, and I think the ANC has actually given up that dream. You know, which brings us to the fact that like the president keeps talking about a national dialogue that should take us back and make us discuss our nationhood and our priorities as a country. And I wonder how effective that will actually be, given the fact that that the ANC does not enjoy, the ANC being the main party in the GNU, it no longer enjoys that credibility even within African communities. Now imagine now if you are to draw in all these other sectors of society, including these people who want to basically secede from South Africa and create an ethnic Bantustan. I'm not sure kind of like how that will succeed with the personage of Ramaphosa and mainly the ANC at the center of that project.
So people who might be tempted by this, and I'm sort of reminded that our constitution, one of the opening lines is South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black or white. And that, of course, is taken from the Freedom Charter, I mean, formed in a different time, but more relevant now, perhaps, than maybe it's ever been. And I make that point because you and I, Mondli, should be able to walk down any street in any part of this country, arm in arm. We can wear our Springbok rugby jerseys if you want, and basically be able to sort of, you know, meet and talk to other South Africans. These people seem to be, as I understand it, arguing for something completely different. How do we argue against them? How do we convince them that if they still want to support the Springboks, they need to be part of us?
Well, I don't think you can convince the likes of Kali Kriel and Ernst Roots, the main like protagonists, and the rest of the leadership of AfriForum and Solidarity, etc., etc. I think you can still convince the majority of Afrikanerdom, of Afrikaners in South Africa, who I think a lot of them do not actually buy into this. It is a growing ideology, but I don't think it is yet a dominant ideology in the Afrikaans community. So I think there actually is still a need for loudness, both by political leadership of the various parties that do not subscribe to that. And also I think in broader society, I think there has to be a much broader civil society conversation and anti this secession movement. And you can allow them to speak, and that I don't think that you should shut them up. But I think the other voices do need to be louder. And I think that we need to go back to non-racialism and actually kind of like put non-racialism firmly at the center of the society. And then, you know, as uncomfortable as many people see this, I think what gives these guys ammunition is the push by the ANC component of the GNU, but the ANC in particular, come up for the Anglicization of the society, which then is being seen as a move to subjugate other languages, but like they say other languages and other cultures, but actually they're talking about Afrikaans. I think that also needs to be handled in a much more nuanced and sensitive manner, because you risk driving even those Afrikaners who buy into a notion of a democratic, unitary South Africa, a non-racial South Africa. You risk driving people with those strong cultural attachments into the arms of those Neanderthals in AfriForum and Solidarity.
You're talking specifically about, when you say Anglicization, you mean using the English language. And of course, this is a very long history going all the way back to the sort of what was called the Anglo-Boer War, or the South African War between the two Boer republics then in the British Empire, which to an extent became about language, even though it wasn't that in the beginning. What you're suggesting then is that all of these issues have a history that predates democratic South Africa.
No, exactly. And there is an attachment. I mean, like now you're in democratic South Africa, and those scars going back to those years are very strong. And then you get to 1994. I mean, like in 1994, for a lot of Afrikaners and a lot of white people, but particularly Afrikaners, was a traumatic event. I think most of us kind of like, we celebrate it as like the great democratic breakthrough. But for a lot of Afrikaners, a significant portion, I mustn't say many, but like a significant portion of Afrikaners, it was a traumatic event in that there was a loss of power and the loss of the dominance of Afrikaans in officialdom in South Africa, and the national discourse. Now it had to be equal to all the other languages, although it still isn't quite. I mean, like English and Afrikaans are still the dominant languages. And also, basically, the center of Afrikaans was, of the Afrikaans community. The NGK was no longer the official church of South Africa, so to speak. So, and there was a lot of that. And then, so that loss of being the dominant tribe in this country, Afrikaners are still getting over that. And then what then comes next is that necessarily so that universities and schools and so on must integrate. And in order for them to integrate, you need to have a kind of like English as a language that's accessible to most people being part of it. And then, so the Afrikaners then stop seeing Stellenbosch as my university. University of Pretoria is no longer my university, it's everybody's university. And Afrikaans is no longer the main language of those universities. So, but having said that, I mean, like Afrikaans, I mean, like these guys kind of like they try to argue that Afrikaans has kind of like has denigrated. Actually, as a cultural group, Afrikaners are still very much highly privileged and highly empowered. And you just have to look at the business community, for instance. I mean, like they are very, a lot of Afrikaans entrepreneurial energy was unleashed once the Afrikaner was no longer seen as an oppressor. And you look at culturally, there's so many Afrikaans cultural festivals all over the country. The literature world is still very much flourishing in Afrikaans, as is music. So this notion that in democratic South Africa, the Afrikaner does not have space to practice their culture is absolute nonsense. And I think that's an argument that needs to be made louder and more frequently by everybody else.
Mondli Makhanya, I really appreciate the time.